Writing formal reports. Reports are used in lots of business contexts. It allows managers and coworkers to stay informed, review options or opinions, make plans, and also make decisions. They can also be considered legal documents, so it's important to make sure that they're accurate, complete, objective, and that they're structured effectively. Remember, the person reading the report may not have a lot of time, so it's important to make it skimmable. That means it's easy to read with headings, white space, and organized effectively. How many of you have written reports for your job? You might have done it without even thinking about it. So there's two different types of reports: informational and analytical. Informational reports really just provide facts or data, and you don't have to come up with any solutions or make recommendations. So the types of those could be activity reports, so maybe where maybe you're working as a security guard or a police officer and they're just writing down something that happened, an incident. Maybe you're doing loss prevention and you're telling what happened, and you have to be objective and just write down the facts. Maybe you're interviewing witnesses and write down what they saw, and you're writing down what you observed. So just giving the information. Maybe you took a trip and you're just reporting back to your manager about what happened on the trip. Maybe you went to a conference, what you learned, and so on. Or maybe you're doing a job and you need to provide progress reports. So halfway through, let them know where you're at and what needs to be done, and so on. So those are considered informational reports. On the other hand, there's analytical reports. Analytical reports combine facts and data, but it goes further. It goes to the next step, where not only do you have to provide the information that you've researched, but you've also have to analyze, interpret, come up with conclusions, and make recommendations on what you think the person should do. So let's look at an example. Let's say that your employer asks you to recommend 3 different charities to which your company could potentially donate money every year. So you've been tasked to look at the pros and cons of each one, what their needs are for each charity, and then to suggest which of the 3 that the company should select. So what do you think? Is this analytical or informational? Well, it's analytical, because you're not just providing the information about 3 different companies that have needs, but you're also making the recommendation. How about this one? So you work in customer service, and every month you have to do a report that talks about how many calls you received, and you summarize what you've done and any events you've performed and anything that might have happened that was outside of the ordinary. So what do you think? Analytical or informational? Informational, right? Because you're just giving them the information or the data, but you're not actually telling them what to do with it. So when you write a report, again, you need to make sure that it's easily organized so that the reader can find what they need. So there's 2 different types of report headings that you could use. Functional headings are ones that are basic, and they would be found in more sort of routine reports. They're basic, they're generic, titles such as introduction, findings, summary, conclusions, and so on. On the other hand, there's descriptive headings. Just like it sounds, these ones provide much more context and information to the reader, so they know what they can find in that section of the report. Functional headings are appropriate in some places, but descriptive headings are more appropriate when you have a high information report where you really need to give a lot of detailed information, and it's sort of specific to the topic you're doing. For our assignment, you will need to make sure you do descriptive headings. So let's take a look at an example. This is from an annual report from Insurance Corporation of British Columbia. And you can see from their table of contents, it lists all of the headings, subheadings, and sub-subheadings in the report. I'll also point out here that you can see how it's organized by how far to the left or how it starts to come in. And that shows the organization. So level 1 headings are all the way to the left. Level 2 headings are slightly moved in. Level 3 headings are even further in. And so you can see at a glance how each topic relates to each other. And so what do you think? Looking at these subheadings and subheadings, what do you think? Are these functional or descriptive headings? Well, of course they're descriptive, right? Because they're specific to this report. You couldn't just take out these headings and put them in any report. They really do give the reader a good sense of what's in each section. So let's look through a couple of heading tips. So first off, you want to make sure that you keep your headings short and clear. This is similar to writing a subject line for an email. You want to make sure it's not too long and that the grammar you use is really tight and concise and to the point. And just like we talked about when we're making lists and bullets, we want to use with headings, we want to use parallel construction. Remember, that means that we follow the same grammatical pattern for each of the headings so that they kind of flow together, they make sense together, and they don't derail the reader and make it more confusing. So here's an example of what I mean. The first section up above is not parallel. You have improved, how can we end, voicemail problems, why we should change fax procedures. Those are not parallel. They follow all different grammatical patterns and they're harder to read as a result. We can change them and improve them down below by putting them in the same verb format. Improving, ending, eliminating, changing. You can see it's much easier to read and much better for the person that's viewing it. So let's look at an example. How could we make these parallel? So if your heading is new challenges for human resources management, and then you have these 4 subheadings underneath, providing employees, we must adjust, can we accommodate, dealing with intermittent absences, you can see that there's some differences. Now in this one, we could keep some the same, but we would need to change some. So what do you think? Which ones would we want to change and which ones would we keep the same? It would probably make sense for us to change B and C so that they could match A and D. A and D already have ing, verb tenses, providing and dealing. So B and C, let's fix those. And looking at the verb there, and B is adjust. So instead, we could just say adjusting to older employees. And for C, we could say accommodating employees involved in family care. So let's talk a little bit about how formal reports are structured. A formal report, remember, can be hundreds of pages long. And so it's important to follow the same pattern so it's easy for people to find things when they're reading them. Now, there's 3 sections in a formal report: the front matter, the body, and the back matter. And we're going to go through each of these one by one because in your assignment, you'll also need to have these 3 sections. And in the front matter, you'll have the title page, a letter or memo of transmittal, a table of contents that includes a list of the figures you've included, and an executive summary. For the body of your report, you're going to have an introduction, discussion of findings, which is where most of your research will be, conclusions and recommendations. Then, for the back matter, you're going to include your references, and probably most of you won't have this, but if you have extra material that doesn't fit in the body, extra data, for example, then that could go in the appendix, but that's optional for this class. So I'm also going to refer you to the PDF document on our Moodle site that goes into much more detail. It has an example from a textbook of a sample formal report, and also has a description next to it with even more details. So I would refer that to you, as well as going through this video, you look that up as well. But let's briefly go through each of the sections one by one. So of course you'll start with your title page. Most of our assignments have not included title pages, but for a formal report, you must have a title page. Notice this, how you start out with the title, at the top. Now, what I don't want you to do is put a generic title, like assignment 3, for example. I want you to actually include a title that would be appropriate for the topic you're doing. Remembering your audience as a group of KPU students. So that's who you're going to present or prepare your report for. That goes next. Then you're going to identify the writer, who's yourself and your information, followed by the date. Notice that this is centered all throughout the page. And also, the title page never has a page number on it. Whenever you submit a formal report, you're also going to submit a letter of transmittal or a memo of transmittal. If it's going to an external organization or person outside of your organization, then it would be in a business letter format. And if it's within your own company, normally it's going to be in a memo format. And this is where, remember, similar to what we did for our proposals, where you have to announce your report, who authorized it. You're going to just give a broad overview of what you're trying to accomplish in this report and where you got your research from. And then at the end, you're going to offer to meet with them or explain the report further if they have any questions. Now, you need to have a table of contents. Remember, some of these reports are hundreds of pages long, so it's really important to easily find the sections that you're looking for. Of course, our report won't be nearly so long, but in order for you to practice and to know how to do it, we're going to be including a table of contents as well. Notice that all of your headings and subheadings should be included, and they should be organized as we mentioned earlier, so that all of the level 1 headings are to the left, level 2 headings are indented a little bit, and so on. If you create this in a software such as Microsoft Word, you can actually designate headings as level 1, level 2, level 3, and then you can create a table of contents automatically. And there's some instructions on how to do that on our Moodle site. What you will want to do is include what we call leaders. Those are the dotted lines that go from the subheading to the page number, and that will help the reader be able to follow along so they know what page number it is for the heading. Also, whenever you have visuals or figures, which we will have in ours, like a graph, you need to also include that on the table of contents and say what page number that is. I'd also like to point out here the page numbering system. So for the front matter, which this is part of, they're all under Roman numerals. So I, IV, and so on. Then once you hit the body of the report, that's when you start with 1, 2, 3, the Arabic numbers. This can be a little bit tricky to do. So there are some tutorials that I've linked to on YouTube and so on to help you figure out how to do that. Your executive summary, although it comes in the front matter, and all of these things are in the front matter, actually you write last. You have to write the body of your report and do your research first before you can actually summarize it, right? So this executive summary, though, is important because you're presenting this to your reader, probably somebody who's very busy, probably a manager or a director or a CEO or whoever. And so maybe they don't have time to read your entire report in great detail, but they still need to know the main points and main content. So the executive summary will give an overview of what you found, where you got your data from, and also condense whatever recommendations you've made so that they're in the loop. They know what to do and what you've come up with without having necessarily to take a lot of time to read the entire report in full. Now we're starting in the body of the report. And as I mentioned, this is the biggest part. But you're going to start with an introduction where you give a shortened version of the title, you identify your topic and your research questions or what you're trying to figure out, and maybe give a little bit of background, who authorized it, perhaps, why this is important, maybe a little bit about a background about the field. So some of this information you actually could use from your proposal and reuse it here if it was well written. So your discussion of findings is the biggest section. This is where you actually answer the research questions you have. So you're going to take each one and answer it in detail. And you're going to organize it according to a logical sequence that makes sense. In this body discussion of findings, you're also going to include any tables, graphs, or figures. So make sure you do that. And you'll have to also make sure you don't just plunk it in. You have to explain it. You have to label it. You have to source it, and so on. We'll talk more about how to do that. But remember that this is where they go. They go in the discussions of findings. So again, another page of discussion of findings. And make sure you have good transitions between your topics. They should lead into each other. You can notice that sometimes the paragraphs don't even have to be really long, but they are broken down by headings and subheadings so that it's easy for the reader to find the information. Here's the next page of the discussion of findings. You can see that the tables and graphs really do help to show information, but again, you always have to have an explanation in the text as well to tell the reader what it means to interpret the data. Finally, because this is an analytical report, you can't just present the information. Probably in a lot of the classes you've done before, you've done lots of essays or research reports, and those have probably been informational, where you've just given the information. But for this purpose, for our class, and probably for a lot of the classes you'll be doing going forward, and probably in your workplace, not only will you have to present the research information, but then you have to explain what that means. You need to draw some conclusions. So for example, if you're doing a career report and you're thinking about becoming a realtor right now, and you do all the information and data, and you realize, there's an economic downturn, and there's a lot of houses are not being sold right now, and so on. So you might draw a conclusion that right now, becoming a realtor is quite tough because of the economy and so on. And then you could draw recommendations. Recommendations are the next steps. What should your audience do, though, if they want to go into this career? So, for example, if you were thinking about doing it on becoming a CPA accountant, so maybe your recommendation might be for the student to complete a bachelor's of business administration in accounting. And maybe one of the recommendations would be for them to join an accounting student club. Or maybe a recommendation could be for them to get a job in an office where they're helping with paperwork or getting experience that way. Or maybe it would be to be networking in a professional association or whatever. So this is what you have to do, though. You can't just leave it with your research. You actually have to think about it. What did you find out? And then what should they do if they want to go into this career? A note that for our assignment, your conclusions will be in paragraph format and your recommendations will be in bullet point format. All right, so we've finished with the body of the report, and now we're at the back matter. And remember, this is the references. And for our class, you need to put it into APA formatting style. And remember that it has to be organized in alphabetical order by the last name or by whoever the author is. And that you need to have at least 5 sources, and they have to follow each of the styles or the types that we talked about, including if you interviewed someone. Also remember, anything that is on this references page, you have to have also cited in the body of your text. So you may need to make sure you have both a references page and also in-text citations, and they have to match with each other. So for example, if you have something referenced in the body of your report in a shortened version, then the long version has to be here on the back. And anything on this back page also has to be, I have to be able to find it referenced in the body of your report. So this is the overview of how to do a formal report, some of the pieces that are needed and how to structure it and so on. But this is just the beginning. So what I would encourage you to do is make sure you read through the instructions for the assignment. Make sure that you're familiar with all of the requirements. How many graphics do you need to include? How many references do you need to include? And so on. There's also a checklist there, and there's a sample for you to look through. Also, don't forget to look at The grading rubric. How will you be marked? What do you need to have in order to get what grade? And also, of course, I'm available to ask questions. The main thing is this isn't a type of assignment or something that you can do at the last minute. It's really important that you start working on it now. And then if you have questions or need help, then I'm happy to help you along the way.